Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Jasmine Lee. Today we will continue to talk about President Trump's agenda on the reciprocal tariffs and his negotiations with various countries, particularly on how these developments is going to affect both Taiwan and U.S. economies. Meanwhile, the markets are closely watching the potential outcomes of the Section 232 investigation, which may determine the scale of the chip tariffs, as well as the TSMC efforts to reduce the potential tariff. How might this development reshape the global semiconductor landscape? Join us today are Konrad Young, former TSMC R&D Director and LeadAgileX Accelerator founding partner, and Liu Da-Nien, CIER Regional Development Studies Center Director. So, Professor Liu, let me ask the first question to you. Could you briefly walk us through the current status of U.S. tariff negotiation at the current moment?
Okay, basically, the U.S. tariff has three parts. The first one we so-called the reciprocal tariff.
Yes.
The U.S. imposed the tariff to all the countries. The tariff range from 10% to maximum 50%.
And Taiwan
is at 32%. Yes. I consider relatively high. So the cover industry under this catalog, including traditional sector, some electronic products, for example, the printers and consumer electronics. Okay, and last year Taiwan export about 25% of its product, compared to the total export to the U.S. I think this part, Taiwan export about 25% of its product to the U.S. Okay, so this is the first part. Second part, we so-called the section you just mentioned, the 232. This is the U.S. domestic law, which says if the coming imports jeopardize the national security of the U.S., U.S. can unilaterally impose any tariff on the
any tariffs.
Any tariff rate. Okay. So far, U.S. already imposed 25% on steel product and automobile and parts. But I think the most importantly, we should recognize the U.S. already complete the investigation. All the due process has been completed on semiconductor-related products.
Oh, it's completed? I thought it's like the
investigation has been completed.
Okay.
Investigation the semiconductor industries and the pharmaceutical industry and the critical mineral industry, which means the U.S. can announce its tariff rate at any time. Okay, so this is I think because for this part, including some electronic product, for example the chips and some electronic components. Okay, that is the main export of Taiwan to the U.S. Last year, the whole Section 232 category covered 70 to 75 of the Taiwan's export to the U.S. So this, if U.S. sooner or later suddenly U.S. announce this tariff, that can generate profound impact on the Taiwanese economy. Okay, so this is the second part. The third part we so-called the fentanyl tariff, because the U.S. complained the China illegally trafficking fentanyl to the U.S. through Canada and Mexico. As a result, U.S. imposed some penalty tariff on these three countries. But this is not much related to the Taiwan, so we should focus on the reciprocal tariff and the Section 232 tariff.
And you mentioned about the Section 232 investigation. This investigation can take up to 270 days to do the investigations.
Okay.
But you mentioned that you think it's already completed.
Already completed. So Trump,
okay.
Trump can announce, the 232 tariff, anytime,
It's just a tool for him,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But Trump it's very difficult to predict the Trump's action. But the 232, I believe, is the most can generate most negative impact on Taiwan once if Trump indeed imposed the tariff on those products.
Do you think we're going to see a 25% tariffs on the semiconductor, just like automobile?
Based on the tariff already imposed, which I say the automobile and the parts and the steel product, I see the tariff rate landing at 25%. 25%. So it is still too early to tell. But anyway, we should watch very closely to see what are the eventual Section 232 tariff because that is the most important part for Taiwan too.
And for reciprocal tariffs, even though it's less important to Taiwan, but still, what do you think? Now we are in this 90 days pause at the current moment. Do you think this 90-day pause is going to be extended?
It is still too early to tell, right? Right now the U.S. negotiates with many countries, including Taiwan. At the early of this month, the U.S. has reached a deal with the U.K. The first agreement reached by the U.S. and its counterpart. However, I personally believe the U.S. may settle the tariff, within the 90 days. I think it is possible.
So the TSMC, in the letter, it says that it warns that if Washington moves forward with imposing tariffs on chips, it could lead to reduced demand from the U.S. customers, a drop in TSMC's revenue, and ultimately jeopardize its previously announced $165 billion investment in Arizona, and potentially even leading to the cancellation of this project. So, Professor Young, what's your view about this TSMC's response?
First, I want to say I retired from TSMC 7 years ago, so I couldn't represent TSMC at all. And it's only my personal view. I think economical view for this is definitely very natural to think tariff will increase the price. The higher price will reduce the demand. And so it's obvious from almost everybody's view. But I think Trump has a different view about this one because he cares more on his domestic the job market and then reindustrialization of the U.S. So those from his viewpoint may be stronger effect compared to the traditional economical law and also the market dynamics for that. So what TSMC statement is definitely obvious for everyone. All the economists already told Trump you shouldn't do that. Yeah, the stock market also do that. But at the end of the day, is the political consideration factor might overtaken the economic factor and market factor. So unless the market collapse. And then, so I think Trump, just like based on what we observed for the past few months, Trump definitely react when the certain things doesn't go the right direction. But he will still insist about this mega policy, the reindustrialization policy, because it's directly related to his voter in Midwest in U.S. So I don't think he will change too much for that.
As you mentioned, it is a political decision, and because this is Trump's second term, so he doesn't have this reelection pressure. And for Professor Liu, TSMC's moves, some people are suggesting it's a show of the resolve in face of Trump's tariff agenda. And how would you advise TSMC to approach negotiations with the administration?
My personal view is although Taiwan enjoy a trade surplus against the U.S. in the semiconductor-related products, however, but we can see our semiconductor products are mainly for the U.S. industrial use. This is very, very complementary nature in the bilateral trade.
Yes, we are partner. We're not competitor.
We are not competitors. Okay. The first one. The second one is this is very different from other countries which enjoy a huge trade surplus against the U.S. For example, Japan, Mexico, Korea. The major trade imbalance comes from automobiles that directly sell to the U.S. customers. As a result, I think the TMC or our Taiwanese government can persuade the U.S. government, say, well, if you impose heavy tariff on the semiconductor products or components, that will also hurt the downstream U.S. industries. That is not beneficial to the U.S. economy as a whole. Another point I would like to raise is we all know the U.S. now is lacking the semiconductor talents. If you impose the high tariff, that will not solve your U.S. problems. As a result, the U.S. should provide a very suitable, low tax environment for the semiconductor industry to develop. As a result, that can make America great again. Otherwise, I don't think Trump will achieve that goal for sure.
And Professor Young, as President Trump, he often refers to cards as a bargaining chip. From your perspective, what is TSMC's strongest card in their hands?
Before talk about TSMC's car, let me talk about U.S. car. U.S. has two very strong car. One is the upstream supplier for the equipment and material, which is Taiwan's weak point. So U.S. has using this car to restrict export control to China, for example, and really kill China industry. And they can do that to Taiwan. So Taiwan is weak to respond to this one. The second car U.S. has is a customer. Even though TSMC supplied to the chips to the U.S. company, which make money, but as you can see, Trump's government also imposed something to the U.S. company, including NVIDIA, restrict to do, and then impose something to Apple if they don't make an iPhone to that. So U.S. can, using their company, which is Taiwan's customer, to put a pressure to Taiwan to move the production into U.S. Right? So those are the two major cars. The Taiwan's car, TSMC car, under these two strong, I call it stick, not just a car. The carrot and stick versus, and it becomes very reactive. The only thing, just like Dr. Liu mentioned, try to convince them this is to benefit U.S. business to the U.S. company, and how much convincing power to them, I personally not sure, but it definitely is a car to try to ask the U.S. customer to convince the government to do that. But just based on what NVIDIA also responds something for the export control, it doesn't seem to have a very strong power to force the government to do it. So it is a car, but it may not be a strong car for U.S. government. That's what my impression.
So we're seeing companies, they are having more proactive moves in order to potentially change the trajectory, but it seems like it's not. It's, as you mentioned earlier, it is still a political decision. Professor Young, you previously said that Taiwan is the global leader in advanced semiconductor manufacturing. So how much longer do you think Taiwan can maintain this dominant position?
Well, I think the semiconductor industry is, I would consider heaven's blessing and heaven's design for Taiwan. And that including all the culture, the people, almost everything, which no country in the world has that kind of a combination. Maybe the closest one, maybe China, but because China was under U.S. restriction, export control. So China is very, very difficult to overcome that pressure. Maybe it will take 100 years or 50 years to start to catch up. But at that time, the semiconductor industry, at least more so, has got into the different kind of mode. So I would say in my life, I will not see anything happen. Taiwan will still dominate. Even Taiwan put a lot of manufacturing site in U.S. Their competitiveness compared to Taiwan manufacturing is still will be weaker. but it doesn't. Again, it's not a competitive situation. It's just a complementary situation because the U.S. Need to have some capacity, especially for their defense industry, which Taiwan manufacturing cannot really play that role. So first, advanced technology, I don't worry about it. In my lifetime, maybe 40, 50 years, when the semiconductor really got into too mature. Before that, Taiwan was still the strongest one in advanced technology, I have to say.
But
the mainstream technology, more mature technology, Taiwan definitely face some potential issue because mainstream technology can be done by everybody in the world. Taiwan still has a very strong manufacturing capability, but China definitely emerged out of a strongest competitor because the export control has much less on the mature technology. So with one-on-one competition from China and Taiwan, Taiwan might definitely facing a bigger problem because in that place, Taiwan doesn't have a U.S. help in terms of export control. So Taiwan need to have a different strategy on the mature technology.
Yeah. And back to you, Professor Liu. So let's move on and talk about the reciprocal tariffs negotiation. Taiwan and the U.S. had held our first round of the in-person talks in Washington D.C. in the end of April. And earlier you mentioned that the UK-US model, which is the first they made the deal as the first. You said that we can reference that. Could you elaborate more on that?
Sure. I think the first one is when the U.S. announced the reciprocal tariff, and the U.S. encouraged, say, well, all the countries, should negotiate with the U.S. Try to do something required by the U.S. and then U.S. can consider to reduce the reciprocal tariff rate. For Taiwan's case, I believe we have to reduce our current tariff against the U.S. In addition to this, we have to reduce or abolish some so-called non-tariff measures, which consider to provide, the barriers to the U.S.
Trade barriers.
But of course, that was defined by the U.S. The U.S. authority. As a result, maybe we also have to deal with for example, the exchange rate problem and all other things. In summary, the U.S. position is all the countries, including Taiwan, has to abolish or to conduct a reform on the whole package in order to reduce the reciprocal tariff rate. But my personal understanding is that even if all the countries, including Taiwan, has done quite a few work, it is very unlikely U.S. will completely wipe out the whole reciprocal rate, maybe reduce to some extent. This is why did I say that? This is because the U.S. has just concluded a deal with the U.K. And the U.S. also mentioned in the future, U.S. will use the U.S.-UK deal as the model for the future negotiation. However, if we look at, in general, during the deal, we can see the UK make more concession than the U.S. The first one. Second one is, ironically, UK last year had a trade deficit against the U.S.
And they still
according to the Trump logic, the U.S. should make more concession than the UK. However, just the opposite. So as a result, I believe all the countries, including Taiwan in the future, has to take the not so some degree of the reciprocal tariff. We should make some preparation in advance.
So we need to be prepared that at least 10%, right? Because that's the number.
10% is the basic. The UK, what the US over UK right now.
So we need to make a lot of concession. And Professor Young earlier mentioned about that the competitive Taiwan's manufacturing capability in the US and our capability in advanced chips. Do you think that is something where we need to compromise to the U.S.?
Yeah, I think we at least we should. I just mentioned our the Trump authority cannot treat all the trade surplus as the same. Our trade surplus as the U.S. is we mainly we only provide it to the U.S. industry, so-called B2B. Not like the other countries, Japan, Korea, is a B2C. That is quite different. So if you impose a high tariff on the semiconductor-related product, that will give the heavy burden to the downstream industry. That may jeopardize the stability of the whole supply chain.
Yeah.
That is not good for the U.S.
Yeah.
Okay, that is not, as a result, we should try to do our best to convince the U.S. side. We are quite different. Our trade structure, as I mentioned, is very complementary in nature. Okay.
And you mentioned about convincing the U.S. And we
Yeah.
know that the U.S. economy contracted by 0.3% in the first quarter.
Yeah.
Do you think that's one of the angles that we can convince the U.S.?
Okay, but first of all, I would say that even if the official statistics, U.S. GDP, the growth rate, contracted, minus 0.3%. But Trump already mentioned, say, well, he took office on January 20th. That is not his fault. He attribute all the mistake to the previous Biden administration. But however, the most of the U.S. citizens, do not accept that point. Say, well, you already taken office, you should take the responsibility because the tariff policy for Trump generate a high degree of the uncertainty. As we know, the U.S. currently the U.S. tariff policy, many of the measures have not been implemented yet. However, the uncertainty caused the very turmoil in the exchange market, the stock market, and the commodity market. So this also the U.S. right now is still the inflation pressure is still there. So most of the Americans concerned about that point because they cannot accept the high inflation rate because they already went through in their previous year ago. So this is a major challenge for the Trump for the Trump administration in the future.
So that will be the most important. But do you think that is going to, because Trump, this is her second term, so he doesn't have a political pressure. Like if the market is not doing well, as Professor Young mentioned about it, it's a political decision. Do you think the market performance is going to have
Trump
pressure?
still believe why Trump used the high tariff because Trump say if you want to serve the U.S. market, you must to invest in the U.S. Okay. However, even if Trump successfully attract foreign investors to invest in the U.S., but we know to have the investment to generate benefit, it takes time. But the tariff negative impact is immediate. So that is the major difference between these two. As a result, the U.S. citizens cannot accept the immediate negative tariff impact. But Trump still try to persuade his voters, say, well, to make America great again, we need some time to wait for all the investment back to the U.S. But however, this is most of so far because his approval rate has been dropped significantly because many U.S. citizens cannot wait that long. So this is a major the reason for the Trump has to reconsider. For example, when he announced the reciprocal tariff rate on April 2nd, and on 1 week later, he postponed to implement this because his approval rate domestically has been dropped. He has to change his decision.
Yeah. And my one last question, Professor Young, do you think, how do you think the semiconductor industry is viewing the negotiations between the Taiwan government and the U.S. government? And do you think Taiwanese government can work more closely with the industry in its negotiation with the U.S. counterpart?
Well, I think Taiwan today, the government and the industry definitely work very closely. As far as I know, they are trying to communicate it, but I'm not quite sure how much Taiwan government can do, because in front of U.S. government, Taiwan government looks powerless. It doesn't really have a lot of cards to do. They definitely want to work together, and they have been working together, but it doesn't necessarily come out with a solution. Again, I always believe political problem only can be solved by political solution, not by economic solution. Today, the argument about from TSMC about that later using the economic solution try to deal with a political problem is not easy to solve. So I think the most immediate political issue will come in from midterm election, maybe next year, when Republican lose, collapse completely because this tariff, and I definitely believe Donald Trump will respond. Not whether it is the last term or not, but he definitely, his goal is try to make a Republican, the conservative, for last longer. If his action really causing the collapse of his party, I think he definitely will react, and that's the political solution he definitely need to deal with. And if that political issue is coming directly connect to the tariff issue, so but before that happened, even the current little bit drop in terms of the population poll. I'm not quite sure how much impact will be, but if that political the wave getting very, very strong, he would definitely react to that. It's not economical. I mean, the economical issue need to propagate to the political issue strong enough for him to respond, to react.
So we'll definitely closely watching how the political situation develops, and we'll definitely also continue to monitor the reciprocal tariff and the Section 232 investigation on semiconductor. Thank you to both of you for your great insights.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching the show. If you like our show, please hit the subscribe. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.